Hey, everybody, welcome back. Taylor here. I'm finally getting back to having a guest on the show. It's been a while since in like the last year throughout the pandemic, but I'm super excited because my guest today is someone who I connected with in the middle of the pandemic while she was overseas in Italy. Now she's in British Columbia and she's been in a bunch of places in between. But her story is fantastic because she's someone who used to work in what I would call like the common grind of 9 to 5 or the startup life. And she did a lot of really great work in social media, in marketing, in business development for startups like Lime and Cabana, tomato, and as well as for bigger brands such as Visit Bishop, Marmot, and Spotify. But in the last couple of years, the reason I'm having her on is because she's the epitome of someone who hit this moment of burnout and broke out, like took the leap, took the very, very important, healthy, but extremely risky leap of figuring out, of like breaking out of that career path and taking the very literally road less traveled into very diverse places in order to not only explore the world and explore what other opportunities are available, but also to explore herself, figure out what's going on, what she wants out of life, and what she can provide and offer to the world that is valuable and fulfilling. And so we're going to cover a lot of really, really relatable topics today that I know that so many of my clients and people in my community face on a daily basis, and a lot of which I have faced as well. Spoiler alert, things like identity, burnout, expressing yourself vulnerably, the process of just finding yourself or looking for yourself, what that even means. So I'm so excited. And I don't even remember how to pronounce your last name, Liz. Is it Fieser? Fieser?
Fieser.
Fieser. Okay, cool.
Right.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to welcome Liz Fieser onto the show. So Liz, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I am very excited. We really started our journey right in the midst of a lot of life change. So I'm really excited to chat about it and look back a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfect. And what's great is that your journey is really about to take its next big step, which we'll get into at some point in this conversation. But the really cool thing is when I found Liz's website and just reached out to her cold, like she and I didn't know each other, she had something on her website that said that she is a recovering philosopher, and on all of her content that she's, you know, a wanderer, she's an adventurer, and she's just insatiably curious. And so there's this explorational aspect of Liz that's not only, like I said, about the world, but about herself, that is just so fascinating and enviable and admirable. So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, honestly, you're going to be you're such a role model already for everybody that's in your audience, but you're setting just such a great example.
That means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess the first question, what I do kind of want to, we might as well start in the beginning, because like in the last year, you and I have talked and you've been in different countries, different times. I can't keep track. I have no idea where you are
I
at a
can't
certain
either.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a hard enough time keeping track of client time zones, and then you're just all over the world. So I'm glad that we could connect here. But let's just start with the beginning, because something that you have said to me in a bio that you sent a while back is that you're in the process of unwinding your identity and your self-worth from the old model of the jobs that you had. And I think it's so common. Like I talk about with people so much about how they tie their self-worth to their job, and they identify with their job. And if they lose that job or the job sucks, then they don't know what to do with their lives and it's painful. So first question for you is, what was that process like of, first of all, just identifying with your job? You know, like, why did you get into that habit, like so many people do, of thinking your self-worth was tied to your job?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think the reason why I tied my self-worth with my job is because it's almost like I was taught that from a generation where your worth and who you are and what you do is your job. I think I look at the kind of the older generation and I look at my parents, and that was, they checked the boxes. Like you graduated college, you get a stable job, you get married, have kids, retire. Yeah. And I was following that model. I was going, okay, I graduated college. Now I need to get a stable job. And it kind of just became this all-encompassing journey to find a stable job that I could make my friends and my parents really, really proud of. And I got into the cycle of like, okay, this job's great, but I can go out at West and work at a Silicon Valley startup. How cool is that? And I really lost myself in just being like, oh, I'm a brand manager or I'm an X and I work for Y. And that was me. And it started to unravel when I was like, well, what am I outside of that? When people would ask, like, oh, like, hi, it's nice to meet you, I would immediately launch into, like, yeah, I'm Liz, I work for blah, blah, blah. And that was kind of like a moment where I was like, I don't have any other outside identifiers. And there's so much more to me, or there used to be so much more to me than a job, where I really fell into endless hours of work. I had no work-life balance. It was just work, no balance. Um, and it was just kind of a toxic cycle. And it was really heavy to start realizing that, what are my hobbies? What do I like doing that isn't just something that like I think I should like doing, or I think I should be doing? It's like that dangerous word of should. Oh, I should be doing this thing that will help me progress to the next level of life as taught by generations before me.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The shooting all over yourself
Oh, it's
that we all do.
oh, it is something that I think that'll be a lifelong journey, is to not use that word and not guilt myself into doing certain things because I think I should.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I've found that as I have gravitated away from saying should and like consciously, I've also replaced it sometimes with could,
Ooh,
basically
I like
meaning the
that.
same. Well, but like I know the healthy version is like, yeah, that's good to be thinking about like what you could be doing, think about an empowering way. But I found
Mhm.
myself also caught in that same trap as should, of saying could but
Ooh,
meaning should, of like what could I be doing today,
which is,
as in
I feel
like,
like
oh, what should I be doing?
could is almost worse than should, because it like makes you think you have an opportunity or an avenue you could be going down, which like almost gives you more options, which for me sometimes that puts you in like a state of chaos. You're like, oh, I could be doing all of these things. What should I be doing? It kind of is like the step before should almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, tricky.
Yeah. Makes another trap. Just
Yeah.
any of the "ud" words
Yeah.
just need to
Ouch.
go. Yeah. But that's fascinating, the way that you described how when somebody would ask or like introduce themselves and you'd be like, hi, I'm Liz, I work for blah blah blah, as though your job and your title was part of your name, was like your last name.
Right. Yeah, truly. It became my central identifier. And when I started to realize that I wasn't happy and, I was feeling this pull towards something else that I didn't know what it was, that the weight of that being like almost like my last name was so overwhelming and scary, to be like, what happens if I put this weight down? Like, what will be
Mm,
left? Right.
yeah.
Mm.
Mm. I mean, that's a super deep question right there, of like
Yeah, that's like, I'm
what.
still on that. I don't have an answer for that yet, but
Well, and like I know, just because so many people I've worked with have asked that question too. It's that fear of like, if I let this huge piece of me go,
Mhm.
what's left of me?
Right.
And like, it almost feels like it's dangerous to let this massive, ball and chain go,
Mhm.
even though it's so liberating as well.
Completely liberating and so freeing, but, like, if you can't see the other side, you're like, "Oh, if I take a step, will there be ground or am I gonna fall?" And either way, like, even falling is, like, a beautiful learning, but it's so scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you say that, because that's where people get stuck, not
Mhm.
thinking, like a lot of people I think get stuck thinking that there needs to be the next thing,
Mhm.
whereas the fall, however dramatic or painful or whatever, can actually be the super positive next thing. But I think it's people's willingness to fall, to
Mhm.
experience that drop,
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
is the barrier.
could not agree more.
Okay. So when you hit that point, when
Mhm.
it was your opportunity to fall, um, first and foremost, like what happened first in order to indicate to you that something was wrong and something needed to change?
I couldn't find the motivation to do my job well. And I like my job and I was good at my job, but I would find new tasks extremely I would just be very defensive and very combative to be like, wait, why do I need to do this? Like I've already done like didn't want to learn anymore. I like couldn't take any more on my plate. And I've always, as a curious person, I love taking more on. I love learning more. But like when I started to get defensive about what my plate had on it, and when I started to get like a little bit bitter about my responsibilities, I knew like that was really the first step. And I felt like I would get the Sunday scaries, but then it would be every morning where I'd be like, oh, I really like, oh, I don't want to take these calls today. And it was almost like my wise mind, like the higher mind was like, Liz, you are burnt out. But as soon as I would get into work mode, I'd be like, oh, logic mind, I'm fine. Like, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And it became this really tumultuous battle between the two, where in my downtime, I would be very burnt out, very stressed, and could feel it in my body. And then just getting into the cycle, and I'd be like, oh, well, it's fine. It's fine. But that really started to wear like the cycle started to break, and I could see really clearly that like there are things I like I like talking on the phone to people, so of course like that brought me joy, but the job and the burnout started to outweigh all of that. So yeah, that was
Okay.
really the moment where I was like, okay, there's some things at play here that need to be addressed.
Yeah. So am I hearing you right that was it more so those tasks that you thought was it something about the task, or was it the fact that just the misalignment and your burnout was making you pissed off or irritated toward any task?
That's it. It was the misalignment of the burnout. Whereas any task that I even liked doing, I was like, oh, how dare they ask me to do that? Like, no, that's just because I was I was so burnt out and so tired, and my energy was so not in the right place. And yeah, definitely the second part of what you just said.
Okay. So
Hmm.
then in your own words, because burnout's fascinating because so many people experience it, the symptoms present differently,
Mm.
but
Hmm.
oftentimes it's some form of similar misalignment.
Hmm.
So what would you, in your own words, what was the misalignment for you specifically?
I think the misalignment was. This is a good question. I I don't think that it was expectation related, where I had done a lot of the growth and the reaching for specific jobs because it was expectations that I thought I should fill. And I felt exhausted by doing a job where I was like, I don't think a 9 to 5 in front of a computer is it for me. I was feeling very tumultuous about like the amount of time I would spend on screens, the amount of hours I would be plugging away, the like kind of assumed always availability of my own personhood that felt really, really bad. And does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And so is it, yeah. So you were, it sounds as though you were noticing that, especially like the drain of sitting 9 to 5 in front of a computer screen, there's just something that did not connect with you about that. There was something unrewarding about
Right.
that.
Yes. And I think I struggled to um I loved the companies I worked for, and I don't want to like, be harsh on them, but I also wasn't extremely motivated to work for companies where I think I was getting to the point where I wanted to work for something that was like bringing me light and a mission that I was really excited about. And again, like the companies I worked for were great. They were, Lime was, doing low income programs was fantastic, but I wanted more. And like something different. And instead of putting myself in I should work for these companies. They're growing fast. They're, big names. That's great. I am feeling pulled towards the smaller, potentially more mission driven companies.
Totally. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's it's cool too to loop it back to the fact that you had been following something of a checklist of
Hmm.
expectations of at
Hmm.
least what you thought or was taught was like the definition of your career and success that you're supposed to get to.
Hmm.
And I'll fill in the blank for the audience, because like it's clear now, knowing you, and if anybody takes a look at your Instagram or your brand at all, that you need freedom. You need you cannot be confined.
Yeah, I struggle with that. I want stability, but I need like some level of freedom, a lot of creativity, a lot of just like autonomy to go and be, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I, since I know you, I think the stability just means that you're working, you know what you're working on, or like you just need some kind of like consistent direction of what the work is like serving. But
Exactly. Yep.
yeah, okay.
To a T.
Awesome. Um, great. So then, yeah, and I think that's an important point to hold on to for a minute for the audience too, because for those people who are experiencing burnout,
Mhm,
burnout oftentimes sneaks up on people,
mhm,
which is ironic too, because like people know that they might hate their job for a really long
mhm,
time, and then burnout doesn't actually occur until a year later, and then they either really have health issues or they finally quit their
mhm,
job, right? And so I think it's really important to remind everybody that like you were feeling that misalignment for a really long time.
mhm. Well, I felt the misalignment for a really long time, and I did something about it for the first time. I like quit Lyme, and I was like, right before the pandemic, I was like, now is my time. I'm gonna figure out everything I want to do. I'm gonna test being more independent, more free. And then the pandemic hit, and I totally spiraled and was like, no, I need stability. I need to know that I'm good at something. I want to feel familiar, and I fell back into exactly where I left off, which at the time was like very grounding. And I was like, oh, it's safe. And like, I think we were all kind of looking for a little bit of safety during the pandemic. And I fell right back into the exact same cycle, the same work habits. I would, get a new job, be really excited for a few months. And then I was like, oh God, this feels so bad. You'd see the defensiveness come up. You would see the lack of wanting to learn. And then I had to go through the whole cycle again. Right when we started to talk, I was, living in Seattle, and I was like, man, it doesn't feel right. And I feel bad. I like took time, but I didn't really take time. And I was scared to make the jump again, because would I just be pulled back into this vortex, which is scary. But yeah, when you feel it and you don't do something about it, it just kind of like you cycle through it until you actually do something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is
Well
scary, which is
said.
so scary. And
Hmm.
like sometimes you fall back into it and you have to be like, wait, stop. I'm doing the exact same thing I've been doing.
Hmm.
It's okay to mess up and to like default back to old behavior when it feels safe. Like, just got to
Yeah.
catch it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it
Mhm.
comes, and it comes from those expectations that you think that you need to be meeting, or the fear of setting new expectations for yourself,
Mhm.
because there's a big wide world and it's scary when there's no like direction for you.
Yeah, and like candidly, I'm going through the same cycle now that I'm back in North America, where I'm applying to jobs and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I'm doing the same thing because it's a familiar place. I'm looking for that direction, and I had to stop myself and pull myself back a few times. And thankfully, I have a partner who's like, wait, hey, like Liz, he's seen me through both of them. He's like, Liz, what are you doing? Like, you're doing the thing again. I'm like, crap. Like, it's hard to catch yourself, especially when you're decades in the making of like this, your personality and your understanding of how things should be done or could be done or would be done is, pretty baked in. So you have to just give yourself grace.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's funny. It's like an American made pattern.
My
You're
God.
back in
No,
you're back
like
in North America and it just
I feel
repeats.
like immediately they're like, welcome back to the American dream. You're gonna get married, you're gonna have kids, you're gonna, retire and die. And you're not like, there's gonna be no present living. It's just gonna be future and past. Good
Yep.
luck.
Yep. Here's your job
Yeah.
application. Yeah.
Here's your job application. Here's 18 recruiters in your inbox. And like, oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, totally. So, because of that sort of checklist that so many people kind of inherit from the older generation, there's oftentimes a very confusing idea of what success is, what
Mm,
success means. And to speak candidly for myself too, like my parents were great. I have a phenomenal relationship with them. I'm very lucky. And they always wanted me to, do well in school so that I get into a good college, and then do
mhm,
well in college and just get good grades and do well in college so I get a job, get a good
mhm,
job. So their kind of idea of success was bent on this idea of just like do well to get to this next level of just some kind of security or just
mhm,
predictability of whatever the career looks like. But it was ambiguous. I never asked them to like define success for me. And they never
mhm,
told me you need to get exactly straight A's. So you go to this exact Ivy League school so that you can get this exact kind of job. So the
mhm,
criteria wasn't there. There's just this idea of success that I kind of found myself thinking I needed to pursue. Right.
mhm.
So what was that like for you, since you were following this checklist and then you attached yourself to the work? What was the definition of success then, and what is it now for you?
So it's interesting. My parents were also very similar. Get good grades in high school, be a good student, go to college, which I originally like was a little apprehensive about. I wasn't super stoked on college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I, transferred in the middle of my freshman year for love, which did not work out, obviously, because I was, 18 and it was my first love. But my parents were always really supportive of um very ambiguous, just like you, kind of like be successful, but like, follow your dreams, which like, what does that mean when you're 18 years old? And then, you graduate college and you're like, I majored in philosophy, and I'm like, now what? And I didn't know what to do. And I knew I didn't want to go back to school. I'm like, I made it through, I'm good, I'm done. But I knew like making money was kind of the driver. It's like get a good job where you can make money and like support yourself and be like a functioning adult and human. I would say that was kind of the biggest guidance. And then as
Mm,
for like Silicon Valley, I started to make friends in Washington, D.C. when I lived there. And my partner at the time was very into startups. And I saw that as like, oh, that's what success means, is to work for like an early stage startup, maybe dabble in, having my voice heard at a low level. Like, could I get to like an exec and have their ear? And I worked for like a really small company in Chattanooga, and then eventually, went out west. But success to me was always defined by the people around me instead of what I thought success was. So for my friends in DC, it was like a good job and potentially working for a Silicon Valley company or a startup. And then for my parents, it's making good money. And I never sat back and was like, wait a second, what do I think of as success? And I still don't know if I have a strong definition, but I would say success nowadays is like, if I can slow, and it's a daily success, if I can slow down and be present and, um, be a part of a community and make other people feel heard and loved, then that's success. That's it. Like that's that
mm,
I'm doing, I'm winning. And I would say like not having a non-successful day is like getting wrapped up in the past or wrapped up in the future and like letting it completely train wreck my whole day, or like train wreck my attitude towards someone else, or getting caught up in like comparison or jealousy or fears of other people's opinions. That's like failing to me. And
mm.
again, I'm human, I do it all the time. But success is really just more of a daily thing. I don't have any like big life end of life success markers. I think I I don't think I will have one. I think it's just kind of like seeing what happens, and then when I get towards the end of life, maybe I'll have more of a specific, yeah, list.
Yeah. So in like 60 years, we'll re-record an episode. Just
Yeah.
see, yeah, see how it goes, see how it went.
Yeah. Hopefully 60 or 80 years from now, I'll be like, you know what, Taylor? Like, I know exactly what success means. Yeah.
You'll be like, I can finally answer your question.
Yeah. Oh God, that'd be great.
That's funny. But that's, I know that it's kind of like a trap even to ask the question like I did, because for people like yourself who are on such a long and continuous journey of self-exploration, like you said, success can change every day. It can change by the hour. You might get a phone call of a new opportunity. Success is totally new, and or you might find that job that you truly love or what have you, and it's like, boom, move into that, success has changed.
Right.
So I love that, and I want that to be permission to anybody who hears this, that success can change and it can be personalized and you can change it however many times you want.
Yeah, I see that and raise it as like fluid is a good thing. If you're fluid and changing, you are human. Like that to me, I just feel like I learned this where it's like, oh, I'll say something, 3 months ago, and then I'll completely change my opinion and be like, you know what? New information, I've changed what I think. And I've always held myself to the standard. I'm like, oh, I made this claim. I have to be this person, or I have to be this way, or think this thing. But like having the permission to be a fluid, changing human is so freeing. And like anyone that's like holding you to the stake of being like, well, you said this one thing, like maybe think about that relationship, because that's not fair. And that's also like we are human, we change a lot, a lot.
Constantly,
Constantly.
all the time. Yeah, and this actually leads me to the next topic that I'm super excited to hear your take on, because I heard on a podcast recently, and of course, I mean, I hear this all the time in the self-help world too, of like, we humans, we need consistency and we need unpredictability. We need the unpredictability to help us grow, but we also, our brains love routine, we love predictability, we love control to an extent. And so what I heard, and someone worded it really well, is that we love having this consistent idea of ourself. Like we like to think that we have a consistent self, that it's like, oh good, tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be the same person as I am today. Almost as like this bedrock foundation of safety.
Okay.
Right. But to your point, we are changing every second. Our molecules and everything is changing every second as we're taking in stimuli. And so this concept of the self, which is obviously examined throughout philosophy and religion and everything, is so transient. And that's part of why so many people have such a hard time with this idea of having a consistent self, because it's like, I can't hold on. It's like a hot potato. It's like constantly trying to like hop out of your hands. And so the reason I thought of this for you is because, there's this, there's the humorous sort of stereotype about millennials and people like in our overall age bracket, that we are the generation that loves to just go out and find ourselves.
Yes.
Right. It's like our motivation. And I know I went to school with a guy who wrote an amazing book, and he just like walked around the world, like not around the world, around the country after he graduated. His name is Andrew Forstoffel. And he made a hilarious comment in a speech I heard him give one time, where his mom, like he graduated from a liberal arts college with me, and liberal arts is the same kind of thing of setting you up to go find yourself. And and he told his parents, I'm going to go walk across the country and just talk to people, see what experience I have by myself. And I forget the reaction, but obviously the parents were a little surprised that it wasn't like, you're not getting a job? Like what?
Yeah, what?
So anyway, so there's this millennial kind of stereotype about finding yourself, and how the older generation like doesn't really understand that, because it's so much more about the checklist you brought up. You though, like you are an example of like someone who is every day actively and like showing the process of finding yourself, because you're expressing it on your social media, in your blog, everything. And so how do you personally reconcile with that? because like you fall into that category of like a millennial who's just out finding herself, who quit the grind,
Mm-hmm.
but you're doing it in such like an epic and specific and like public deep way. So how do you reconcile that?
It's a great question. So I'm going to touch on so many of the things you just said.
Sure.
I think it's the basic human needs. There are like five of them. And you're right. It's stability and also like spontaneity. And these two things are like the biggest battles in my mind, where part of me like desperately craves grounding and stability. And the other part is like, absolutely not. Every 2 weeks, I think I go through a cycle. I'm like, I need to be grounded somewhere. I need to like settle. And then I'll spend 2 weeks there and I'm like, oh my God, this is way too much time. I should leave. I need to go somewhere. So like I feel that on a deep level. But it's interesting. I also think, you know, waking up and knowing that you're like a consistent being. It's like I try to not put myself in that box, but the consistent mindset that I try to keep myself in is that I might not be the same person when I wake up, but I know I'm going to be okay. Like every day, I just need to know that like no matter what happens, like I'm okay. Like that is my consistent stability, that no matter what situation I find myself in, like I'm going to have my breath, I'm going to be okay. And that's like my base level. And it's been a really hard time I say it, and even now I'm like, I know that I struggle to know that, because our minds are dangerous big places that can play tons of tricks on us and make us think the worst scenarios. But in terms of reconciling the finding yourself and then not kind of falling into the checklist, I think I when I originally quit my jobs and tried to disengage and disentangle myself from that job identifier, I was like going out and looking to find myself. And it's been a year now. Like I have been, or 10 months since I quit, and I've been finding myself. And I'm finding that actually actively going out and searching is not it for me. I just want to be myself. And that's an everyday
Hmm.
examination of being like, well, who do I want to be today? Like, am I, a trail runner? Am I a writer? And like letting myself be myself is a way of finding myself. That sounds like very meta, but I actually think that is the healthiest way to find yourself, is to just let yourself be. Which again, way easier said than done. But like take it moment by moment, day by day. Be like, in the morning, like I just want to have a slow morning. And like that doesn't need to be every day. You could have a early wake up call tomorrow and go for a run, or there's just a lot more flexibility and a lot more like you have a less of a mental load when you just stop searching and let it happen, because like your body and who you are like will exist no matter what you're searching for. If you're always looking forward, you're missing the exact person you're being right now in this search. Sure, I'm a searching person, but like that's not the only part of me. And hopefully that
Mhm.
made sense. That wasn't just like a very roundabout, like high level philosophical way of describing it.
No, 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 no. Like I love the way that you just described that, actually.
Oh, thank
Like
you.
that's yeah, because you're the first person I've really asked that question of like this idea of finding yourself, whereas so many people that I talk to, and myself included, are kind of in the same bucket as you are of like wanting to learn more about who we
Yep.
are and be ourselves and do the things that we find fulfilling. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
hard. So we need, that's why I'm asking this question, just because of like to help other people feel comfortable, in your words, being yourself or being
Yeah.
themselves. But I
Right.
love that.
Like that finding something to do that's fulfilling is like not a future thing. It's right now. Like what would fulfill you right now? And sure, we do exist in a world where jobs are normal and like jobs are a big part of it, and making money is important to live. Like it doesn't have to be a job. It could be a job, and you could create your own. Like there's just endless opportunities. And I think one thing why our generation struggles so much is we don't have mentors who have done it before. Like our parents have followed a very strict
Mm,
script, and like they don't understand finding themselves because they've done it, their way. And our generation is looking for like someone to guide us. We're kind of just like blindly going out, but instead of just like taking a step back and being like, hey, what do I want? Who am I right now? we're looking for an answer like our parents would have, or our parents would give us, which is like, here's what you're looking for, here's your thing. When in reality,
Mhm.
we're not looking for one thing. We're looking for almost like a continually changing path forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the fulcrum of my work with people is to help them figure out what is that, I call it their purpose, but like what is what is the thing that they are serving underneath everything that they do?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that can then be applied to countless careers. You
Right.
know, as long as you're serving that thing underneath, you can have 25 jobs throughout your life,
Right.
and it's
It's
fine.
just a
And
means to do it. It's a means to like serve that deeper calling, that like thing that sets your soul on fire. It doesn't have to be a job. It doesn't have to be a thing. It's just a means. Yeah.
yeah, I love that. And this is, I mean, this is also helpful to just that idea of just be yourself. And that's the way that you're quote unquote finding yourself. Because since I've consumed a lot of your content, I've read a lot of your writing, your process seems like the expression of
Mm,
yourself, or I should say, as you are being yourself, and then you express what you want to express that day on your
yeah.
post. That's how, like, that's this process that you're talking about. That's the self-exploration process that you're talking about, of like, be yourself and express yourself, and then be
Mhm.
yourself and express yourself.
Right. And it's funny because when I first started writing, I had very prescriptive, specific topics that that I would write about. Like, here's what I'm going to write about. And as I let that go, I let myself just kind of write whatever I was feeling and let it be whatever it was I was in the moment. Am I feeling poetic? Do I want to write poems? Am I feeling like a poet? Am I feeling like I really need to talk about shame because I'm feeling really like shameful? Either way, it was like my main driver was finding a way to use my voice to share human experiences. Like that seems to be like a very specific purpose, but I really want to share and like you know, I know vulnerability is such a hot topic right now, and everyone's like, vulnerability, it's amazing, everyone should be doing it. But like, truly, yeah, I really thrive off of doing that and sharing and kind of like breaking down the walls. So like writing for me is such a means to do that. And that could be also, it doesn't have to be writing. It could be, you know, having a chat with a friend or, you know, so many other things.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm glad you brought up vulnerability, because I have a question
Great.
about that.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, separate from the fact that it's trendy, I think vulnerability still, I think the word authenticity, I
Mm,
think that's even more trendy than
yeah.
vulnerability, because authenticity has so much more room for interpretation.
Hmm.
Whereas vulnerability, I feel like people are so scared of being vulnerable that it's
Hmm.
almost like vulnerability is not, like, the trendiness doesn't outweigh like its real actual like importance,
Hmm.
because like
Authenticity can be
authentic,
like, yeah, interpreted a lot of different ways.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
So for you, um I guess my first question is, well, no, I'm going to stay on vulnerability for a second. So for you, because your content is so vulnerable, like, yeah, you talk about shame for 3 days in a
Oh
row, or
my gosh.
you talk about how hard you are on yourself, or you talk about, and like, issues in the relationship or something that you are taking responsibility for. I mean, that's extreme public vulnerability.
Hmm.
So compare that to someone who doesn't want to be that vulnerable, but this is the Liz that's in a parallel universe, that's not being that vulnerable, but still
Hmm.
showing the pretty pictures that you
Hmm.
post, still
Hmm.
posting maybe something in the caption related to shame, but not telling the deeply personal experience.
Hmm.
So for you, like, why and how did you take that leap to not only just start showing more of your journey and just sharing little thoughts? Why did you jump all the way to like totally raw, totally open, totally vulnerable publicly?
Yeah. So I used to be, you know, posting a pretty picture, maybe like dabbling in a couple of comments or, you know, having a caption that would be just scratching the surface. And I want to say that it was like fall of 2018 that I was like, you know what? I wrote more, and I don't remember, there wasn't like a specific post where I was like, I'm going to share more, but I slowly started to ease into sharing more of the hardships, and
Mm,
showing a lot more of the emotion. And to be fair, I'm going to be totally honest. Like, I had crazy pushback. Like, I had very good friends. Like, even one of my best friends was like, "You're sharing too much on Instagram." And I was like, "Holy shit." I was like, sorry, language, but like,
that's okay.
it took me back. I was like, "Whoa, wait a second. Like, am I sharing too much? Is this vulnerability being received poorly?" But for me, with those comments came the comments from, honestly, mostly perfect strangers who were like, "Wow, thank you for sharing. I feel like I've had a similar situation." And as I've continued to share and, show up with radical truth, I have been met with the most incredible radical truth in return. I've had people reach out and tell me their secrets. I'm a stranger on the internet, and they send me DMs that are long and beautiful and heartfelt. And I don't think I would have that. I don't think I would have those conversations if people didn't see me doing it first. If and I firmly believe that, like, we lead by example. And if I
Mhm.
want to attract and be around people who are willing to do, the introspective viewing and thinking, then I need to do it, and I need to share it. And like, Instagram didn't start out as like this, journal-esque form for me, but it transformed into that, and it became really cathartic for me to put it out there, knowing that I'm going to make some people uncomfortable, but the people who I want to be there, they're going to feel at home. They're going to feel like I'm a friend, or I'm, someone that they can look to and be like, "Oh, well, if Liz is sharing, I can share. If Liz can do this, then I can do this. I can think about this. I should be thinking about this." Again, don't should yourself, but like, something along those lines,
Mm,
where I really wanted it to become a safe place, a vulnerable place. And vulnerability is so scary, but radical truth, like, it sets you free. Radical acceptance sets you free. And yeah, I think it attracts the people that you who also want to be radically free in that sense.
yeah, I mean, that's beautiful. And I
Thank
think
you.
I love, I don't know the trajectory of like when you're following, especially on Instagram, like really started to grow or anything, but at least from this past year, I know just from my own my own psych research that that kind of openness that you're talking about, of like that confidence of just putting yourself out there, trying to connect with others, trying to share more of yourself, especially around mental health, that's what was closing a lot of people down, that fear.
Hmm.
And what happens is when we don't let ourselves be open and vulnerable, we just kind of close ourselves down and we
Right.
isolate and we disconnect. And so it's constantly this, you're constantly resisting the closing down. That's what vulnerability is. You need to keep practicing vulnerability so that you don't ever close down,
Close.
right? It's always this
Yes.
like it's trying to constrict.
Right, because it's so scary, and it's so much easier to just like close in and not share or push feelings down, instead of
Mhm.
putting it out there and potentially, getting bad feedback, or having someone be like, "Hey, I don't like this version of yourself." Or like, that's
Yeah.
hard when you're like, here's who I am, here's how I feel, and they're like, no. And that's painful, but it's like, you need to be true to yourself, because that's, the most important person, which sounds narcissistic, but it's not, I swear.
Oh God, no, it's not. No, you need to be true to yourself. Absolutely. Otherwise
Mhm.
you won't be happy.
Right.
Um, and so I'm going to put a pin in this part of the conversation because I want to challenge you in the beginning of this. So before you got to that part where I guess, yeah, yeah. So before you got to the part where your friends were negatively reacting and
Mhm.
then total strangers were positively reacting, what was it for you that got you over that hump of just like posting some thoughts and some feelings to, okay, let's talk about all of it?
So it was really cathartic for me. And to be fair, like, once I got bad feedback, I stopped posting. Like, I rolled everything way back. I can remember I took a trip with a friend to Bend, Oregon. And I was like, I think I just need to stop. I need to stop sharing as much. I need to just roll things back. And I spent the weekend thinking about it. And on Sunday, I posted how I shared my journey of like, I got negative feedback. I thought I was going to do something about it, but I need to like be able to set myself free. And I can picture the photo in my head. I'm like, that was the moment where I was like, you know what, this is more important for my mental health and for, I feel compelled to do this and it feels really good and really right. And that was my moment where it's like, okay, you know what? It's cathartic. It's not hurting anyone. Sure, people are judging, but it felt really, really good and right in my body and in my mind. After I very much tried to take time away from it. Like when you just make a decision and you're like, I'm not gonna do this thing. And you sit in it and you're like, this isn't right. Like I took the time, I took the space, and I was like, you know what? We're gonna stick with it and
Wow.
disappoint them because I'd rather disappoint them than disappoint myself.
Wow. Love. Yep. That's
Yep.
perfect. Beautiful. And again, I mean, I think that's such what's really cool is to like encapsulate this for people who are listening is like, if you want to get to this point of like, being yourself, trusting yourself, expressing yourself truthfully, what you've described is that it didn't happen overnight. You started to kind of test the waters by posting pictures and a couple thoughts in the captions, and then you had that moment of like, ooh, should I even be doing this? But
Mm-hmm.
then you listened to your gut and you said
Mm-hmm.
there's something that I need to be saying. And what's cool is for you, that next post was like
Yeah,
the linchpin,
it
that
was.
unleashed the waterfall basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's, yeah. And I think that's just so
Exactly.
important for people to know, because a lot of people, I mean, it takes forever to get to the point of being able to listen to your gut and
Mm-hmm.
having the bravery just to start posting anything.
Yeah.
But for people to trust the process and trust themselves enough to get to that post that you then did, whatever that post
Mm-hmm.
looks like for them,
Yeah.
or whatever it is, version of expression it is, that, yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of courage, but it's a
It takes a
process.
it takes a ton of courage and it's a process, but it's also, it kind of goes back to every day you're going to wake up and you're going to be okay. Like if you put yourself out there, no matter what happens, no matter what response, like know you're going to be okay and you can handle it. So it takes a long time to get there, but like the okayness is very much there as soon as you want to take it. And again, it is a process. It's the journey to like really sit in that. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I realized I didn't comment on that before. I love that idea of, or that concept of just waking up and just the reminder of like, okay, I'm okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Just that reminder of, because like, let's be honest, there's so many people in the world who wake up and even if they're quote unquote okay in that moment,
Mhm.
like they're alive, they're healthy, they may not be safe. Like a
Right.
lot of people live in unsafe situations, but it's hard for people to separate this idea of being okay, like
Mhm.
them in their body, in their health, in their awareness,
Mhm.
versus being safe.
Absolutely. There is very much a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And the only kind of like teaching point with that, of course, is that if you're able to have that awareness of the fact that you're okay, you're going to be better equipped to handle whatever you need to handle that day.
To get to safety, to do what yeah, absolutely. It's a inside internal, like I'm okay versus external. External is like, it's like step one, are you okay in yourself and your body and your breath and your moment? And then if you know that if you're okay and you check the box there, you're like, all right, now I can move forward with moving to safety or getting to a place where your outside world is also okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I mean, you just gave a little formula for it. I love it.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
I don't even need to say anything to that. People should just
Uh,
write that down. That's great. Um, and another piece, I mean, I'll add like the next piece to that too, is like people want to have some kind of light at the end of the tunnel as well, of like
Mhm.
what they're working towards or why they're even there, why they're even expressing themselves more
Mhm.
truthfully to begin with. And so for you, and what I'm super excited to announce now is that you have now offered your very first tour guiding trip to Patagonia to hike
Mhm.
the multiple ranges in Patagonia sometime next year, which we'll put the link, don't worry, in the show notes. So this is definitely a shameless plug. Um, but I know a lot of our conversations have been like, you've been continuing to practice this discipline of self-expression, not knowing where it's going, not
Yep.
knowing if you want to monetize anything, not knowing if you want to turn it into kind of like a bigger brand of any kind. And so this is a two-part question. So A, what has that been like for you motivation wise when you haven't really known where it's going, but you've still gotten up and you've still been disciplined to express yourself?
Mhm.
But then what's it like for you now, now that you've taken this leap and you're offering this guided trip that you get to lead?
Yeah, so the first so part A, I still don't know if I'm out of the weeds in terms of like getting up and feeling like I have like this light at the end of the tunnel. I think I don't
Sure,
know,
sure.
even with this beautiful offering that I'm very excited about, I don't know if it's it. I was actually super hesitant. It took me months to commit to it. Like, oh my God, it was like a very long conversation with the company Trova Trips. And I think the big thing for me is continuing to write and continuing to post, and I feel like through that I am gaining the insight to be like, okay, that's a big driver for me. Why is that such a big driver? Maybe there isn't a light at the end of the tunnel, but pulling it back to that day to day, I think maybe the light at the end of the tunnel is that I get to wake up every day and occasionally write and occasionally do all these things, but it's tricky. I try not to get too caught up in needing that the light at the end of the tunnel because the tunnel's really cool. I'm like, I might as well just sit in here and like the dark is great and there or like there's stars and like I think that's where I'm at right now, where I'm like, even if there's no light at the end, there is beauty on the walls around me. And
Oh my God. I love
whatever
that.
that means. I know it's like such a like kind of depressing, but the darkness can be really enlightening. And I think that's just
Yeah.
where I'm at. And although this trip is like, I'm so excited. Of course, I have like incredible imposter syndrome where I'm like, oh my God, please let this trip be like amazing and everyone comes and I am what they expect. Of course there's like that like a little bit of pressure I'm putting on myself to be what everyone kind of expects, but I'm just going to show up as myself, be who I am. Like there's no point in hiding it, and like hopefully that will free others to also show up, be themselves, be vulnerable, be honest, be weird. So it's exciting. I'm not sure if this is going to be like kind of a long-term pipeline, maybe more trips to come. This is like going to be a fun experience. So it's not for a full year, which is also like I'm not used to planning that far in advance. I would say my travel schedule is usually a 2 week minimum. And I'm like, okay, that's good. And a maximum of maybe a month. So it'll be really interesting. I'm not sure if that answered your questions, but
Yeah, no, it did. I mean, I love the way you worded that. So two things really stood out. The first is that there doesn't need to be a full light at the end of the tunnel. And
Mhm.
it's true. I mean, I hope I didn't try to imply this. To just that
I
this
know
trip is finally like, you've made it.
something. Yeah.
Right? No, not at all. I mean, I just think it's such a cool and extremely logical step, because if anybody's familiar with your
Mhm.
brand, you are hiking, you're trail running, you're climbing all these mountains all the time, kind of thing. Like that's your home.
Mhm.
And so this trip, or this next step, just makes such perfect sense. But I love that reminder that there doesn't need to be a full light. There could just be like a little glimmer of at
A
least the
glimmer.
next light.
Yeah.
But my favorite part of what you said is that the tunnel is pretty great too.
The tunnel's great. It feels very safe because it's like it's your go-to, right? Like you're moving forward no matter what, right? But like this is kind of like me getting off at an exit, being like, do I want to stay at this exit? I don't know. I could always just come back to the tunnel and like keep going a little bit further, get off another time. And I think that's been the most like I have to remind myself that like I can get off, this highway or this, in this tunnel test things, get back on the highway, worst comes to worst. Like, get a little
Yeah.
respite, a little bit of a glimmer, go to a gas station and get a good snack and then be like, oh, you know what? Like, don't love this town. Let's keep going to the next, or, whatever.
Yeah. I love it. I love the metaphor
Yeah.
dive. And it's,
Yeah. Sorry. That was deep.
and no, that's fine. And I'm going to take it even further, because there was a group I spoke to a few months ago where I talked about how I use the train metaphor, that if
Mhm.
we are constantly just like, if we're thinking we're in the back of a train and we
Mhm.
need to get to the front of the train,
Mhm.
and we're so hyper focused on getting to the front car of the train while the train is in motion,
Mhm.
we're just going to barrel through all the other cars, past all the people, like
Yeah.
knocking luggage out of the way just to get to the front. But then when we get to the front, we're still by ourselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if we take our time, go from one train to the next or one car to the
Mhm.
next, we will see what kind of luggage it is. We'll get to meet new people. We'll get to take a look
Mhm.
outside the window. New opportunities arise when we are enjoying the process,
Yes. 100%. Yes.
which I think is, I think you're a really good example of that too. And that this trip next year, so many opportunities may come just because that's a light at the end of the tunnel,
Mhm.
but so many more things might arise before you even get to that trip
So
or
true.
beyond it. So
Mhm. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
I love it. Okay, so since we're philosophizing using metaphors and everything, something I do want to go back to is that you you majored in philosophy, you said, right?
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
which I don't think I knew that, but I still hang myself up on the thing that you have on your website, which says that you're a recovering philosopher. Because let's be honest, like we're never recovering philosophers. If you're a philosopher, you're going to continue to philosophize. And
Yep.
so I guess I'll just ask about that. So like, what do you mean by a recovering philosopher? And I ask this in the context of so many people who find value in self-reflection, in
Mhm.
reflecting on their psychology, on the philosophy of their lives, have you. So, and because it never ends, I'm just curious your take on it.
That phrase really makes people they get really hung up on it. I'm not gonna lie. You are not
Yeah.
the first person to be
See?
like, what the hell does that mean, Liz? I'm like, well, so okay. Here's my thought process. I, majored in philosophy. I learned so much of the art of thinking. And I agree, like life is a series of beautiful reflections and growth. But the reason why it's recovering is because it's almost been detrimental to the point where am an overthinker. I struggle to be present because I'm constantly sinking into that logic brain where I'm like, something needs context, something
Mm,
needs to be explained. I need to understand this, which is, again, curiosity is an incredible thing, but it becomes more of a hindrance and less of a tool when it's constant and it's like kind of this fierce like pull to like have all the answers, have all the knowledge. And someone gave me a great example that like self growth is like a tree. It's gonna grow no matter if you pay attention to it or not. You're gonna grow, you're gonna learn, you're gonna do the things, and like you're gonna be fed light and all of the nutrients you need, whether you're actively making yourself grow or not. And a lot of the times I fall into this category of forced growth, and which I kind of attribute a little bit to that philosophy background where I'm like, well,
mm,
the more I know, the better I'll be at living. It's like, well, you're doing a good job just doing it, just letting yourself, it goes back to just letting yourself be, which I think is tricky. So that's my thought process behind it. I think sometimes the recovering is like letting yourself step back from the overthinking and the constant need to defend or to understand or to push yourself in some way instead of just existence is good, your existence is good, how you exist is good. Take a breath, Liz.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. I
Mhm.
appreciate that answer, because I can definitely relate.
Mhm.
In college, I studied neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy all at the same time.
That's a trio. Holy cow.
It's a trio, because it's like
Yeah.
the way that I like thinking about it was that, neuroscience was like the specific science, and then
Mhm.
psychology was like a mix of like the science with the philosophy
Oh
and the
my
theory,
god.
of course. And then philosophy was like all philosophy. So
Mhm.
holy moly. Yeah. So there was, and especially because like I experienced my own experiences of like mental health issues in college. Like my most like
Mhm.
concrete bout of it was in college while I was studying all that stuff.
Oh my gosh.
So there's nothing more meta
Mm-mm,
than
mm-mm.
studying
Nope.
neuroscience, psych, and philosophy while you're experiencing mental health issues. Right.
Right, which is also very funny because you're like, I know what I'm doing, I know what's happening, but it doesn't make stopping or catching it or helping yourself any easier. So it almost like makes it worse because you're like, I know what I need to do, but why am I struggling? Like, oh,
Oh yeah.
cycles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was what was like the good thing was that I see that purely as like divine intervention, that I was studying exactly what I needed to be studying in order
Mhm.
to equip me to learn how to treat myself, basically.
That that does feel like incredible timing. Like,
Yeah.
can't make that up. You were
No.
definitely meant to be there. You're meant to do all those things. Yep.
Yeah. I jokingly talk about if I was studying like theater or English, I would not have been
Mhm.
able to treat my my experience the way that I did.
No way.
Um, but I bring that up just to say that I can relate to you in that my coping mechanism, especially in
Mhm.
college, was the overthinking, the
Mm.
overanalysis, the over philosophizing. It would
Mhm.
become so heady,
Mhm.
similar to what you said. Not so much because I needed to solve something, but just because I thought analysis was like the fun thing to do that
Right.
makes me feel like I have worth or like I'm
Right.
competent at something or whatever.
Right. It gives you the like self-worth and like the confidence to be like, haha, yes, I understand. Like,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
exactly. Exactly.
Yep.
All the while you're neglecting your emotions, you're neglecting like
Completely.
how you actually show up.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's very problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the if you talk to my longtime former therapist, that was like the topic of many, many sessions. So
Yep.
um yeah, so I appreciate you bringing that up because because people need to know that there is a limit to
Mhm.
the self-analysis.
Yeah.
And currently, I'll say that I'm much, much better at just living every day and just being aware of
Mhm.
who I am, what I'm presenting as each day. And however, I do know that I still like the thing that my trap, I'll call it my trap, is
Yeah.
that I love like thinking that there's a deeper meaning
Mm. Yeah.
to everything.
Everything needs context. Like, everything I talk about, every theory, every emotion needs to have an explanation behind it. I'm like, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
feeling this because X, Y, and Z." Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like, and oftentimes, and the problem is oftentimes there is something behind it, like an emotion.
Mhm.
You can figure it out
Mhm.
and you're like, all right, cool. I mean, that's healthy. That's
Yeah.
called therapy.
No, that is
But,
therapy.
but there's so many times where it's like, especially like because I do this with my clients all the time, and I'm also spiritual in the sense and like religious, and I'm always
Mhm.
thinking in this like existential terms. And so
Mhm.
I have to catch myself so many times over philosophizing about just a random thing that occurred.
Yeah, me too. And I think where it's been detrimental for me is when I try and philosophize about my emotions instead of letting myself feel them. So if I'm feeling angry,
Mm,
I'll like want to go into the whys and give context and explain it instead of just being like, no, I'm just allowed to be angry. And I'm like just angry and I'm just frustrated. And like, I would just put it in a box and be like, oh, I have anger, not I'm angry. And that's been like the real struggle and the trap for me where I don't let myself actually feel it. I'll just explain it. And then I'm like, okay, well, we won't actually deal with it. We won't actually feel it. Let's put it away.
yes. Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Yep. I've been there too. It's the intellectualizing of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
totally.
Mhm.
Yeah, which is such an important defense mechanism for people to be aware of. And I actually made a video of this literally yesterday about how so many people who are scared of the internal journey, scared of the
Mm,
vulnerability, scared of self-awareness and reflection, they focus so much on what's outside of them. And
mm-hmm,
in a way, what you're talking about is if you say, I have anger, instead of
mm-hmm.
saying, I feel angry right now, if you say, I have anger, it means that you're like externalizing it as like this thing that
Exactly.
you have in your hand
Yeah.
that you're not really taking ownership of. It's like a
Uh,
materialistic item like this pen, you know?
right. And how dangerous that is to not let yourself feel it. Like, it's not dangerous. I shouldn't say that, but how much you're missing of the human experience when you're putting it outside and then blaming it on something outside. Like, oh, I'm angry because I don't know, they ran out of dog food at the store. Like, what? Like, sure, I could be, have that anger, but letting myself feel it for a minute is like a lot better than externalizing it. I think you said it way better than I did, but yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, and the way that I put it in the video is that there are so many negative things that can happen if
Mhm.
you keep externalizing. Like, it affects your relationships, it affects you at work, it just affects your physical health. Like, it turns into
Mhm.
deterioration or harmful to your actual body. But the bottom line of it is that it impairs your ability to grow,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
you need the internal and the external in order to
Mhm.
actually grow as a person.
Oh, yes, beautifully said. So important. So important.
Yeah, this is fun because I mean, so many people like philosophy, but I think a lot of people get stuck liking philosophy for the reasons that you've said are sometimes detrimental.
Interesting. Yeah, has that been kind of the what you stumbled across in your work? Like when
uh
people start dabbling, like what happens?
yes, I mean, I won't say philosophy specifically like you studied in college, but
Sure.
definitely, like, there have been a lot of clients, and I don't fault them for
Mhm.
this, but there have been a lot of clients who will hire me for a couple of sessions thinking they want to work with me for a really long time, and
Mhm.
they underestimate the emotional work of this
Yeah.
work. I mean, it's therapy.
Right.
And
Yeah. Deep
but these are
therapy.
people who, yeah, and these are people who, the reason why they get shocked by that and back up and they can't handle it and need to stop is
Mhm.
because they love self-reflection. They love
Mm.
self-analysis. They love the philosophizing about themselves and their lives and concepts of happiness and success.
Mhm.
But as soon as it gets too real and emotional, it's not the right time for them to be doing it.
Yeah, because it's like the depth. It's like fun to swim in the kiddie pool, and then you're in the deep end. You're like, oh my god, I don't know how to swim. Get me out of here. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
I mean,
I can
it's
see it.
like, to reduce it even further, it's like, you and I can talk about what philosophers have said, but as soon
Sure.
as it becomes something about us and our lives and us personally, it's harder.
Mhm. Much harder. Much harder to, yeah, especially to own up to it. That a lot of those things and those thoughts, it's hard to admit fault. We want to be seen as, perfect when we're just so very not perfect.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Hmm.
Yeah. And because of that, and because of, a lot of what's holding people back is that insecurity that
Yeah.
comes out, or they're trying to protect or cover up the insecurity with philosophizing or focusing on the external.
Yeah.
How how do you, because this is an ongoing process all the time for everybody, but especially in your case, now that you have this trip that you're going to be leading,
Yeah.
how do you just manage or deal with when your insecurities are coming up? Like you said, the imposter syndrome, like, how are you
Yeah.
handling it on a daily basis? Because it's a year out. So you have a year to suffer from the imposter syndrome if you want to. But then at a
Truly,
certain point, you
truly.
have to get on the plane and do it. So,
Right.
so
I
how are you facing this day after day?
it is like it is daily. I think giving myself grace on days when I'm feeling insecure and I voice it. Like I will, tell someone, say, hey, I'm not looking for a solution, but will you just listen to me vent about my insecurities? Like, I just need to tell someone, I just need to talk about it. And that, being able to say it out loud, to point at it and go, insecurity, not most of those thoughts are, 100% rooted in just like made up thoughts and stories and narratives that I'm telling myself. That helps a lot.
Mm,
And then, yeah, just letting myself do that instead of being like, oh, I shouldn't, right? The should word of like, I shouldn't feel these things. I'm like, no, like, of course I'm going to feel this. This is new. This is scary. And every day it's like, who knows? I might wake up feeling super confident and be like, this is it. Got a couple of bookings, feeling good. Or like, oh, no one booked. Like maybe I'm a failure. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe no one wants to travel with me, right? And like I've said those all out loud. I'll tell my partner, I'm like, oh my God, no one booked with me. I don't know what this means. Like, is this a reflection on me? And just let myself talk it out and say,
yeah.
okay, now you've had your moment to like bask in my like fears, to let myself feel the fears. And again, that even talking isn't feeling it all together for me. A lot of times I'll have to like take time by myself and process and just like take some breaths and or go outside and let myself be in it. But yeah, it's daily. Insecurities is a big part of just my existence. I
Sure.
and putting yourself out there and social media, all of that stuff is just like inherently scary and very tangible for people to see and to judge, and that's scary too. So just taking it day by day as much as I can.
Nice. I love that. And
Yeah.
I love the way that I just love the simplicity of the fact that all you have to do is just reach out and say something to somebody.
Yeah. So important. It really helps to get it off my chest instead of letting it just like spin around. On the days I do that, I just let myself, it impacts everyone I touch. Like it shows up in really gross ways and really mean or like harsh or like grumpy ways. Even with the dog, I'll be like walking the dog and I'm holding the leash tight. I'm like, oh my God, I should have just like called someone and asked for help, which is hard. But really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Mhm.
I try to talk about this a lot because asking for help is the thing that's taught so much about, like,
Mhm.
ask somebody for help, raise your hand, say that you need help. But what we don't talk about is the fact that people don't know how,
Uh-huh.
because, and this is at least what I've found in my experience, because they don't know what they really need to ask help about. They just know that
Mhm.
they need some kind of help, like something's wrong. And
Mhm.
so
Or how
that,
to ask for support. Like, what kind of support are you asking for? Like, what do you need?
right. And a lot of people don't
Mhm.
know that. I mean, like,
Mhm.
that's that's like sometimes an even bigger trap, because if you say something to a friend or whatever and they don't know how to support you, you don't
Mhm.
know what support to advocate for.
Right.
I think your answer is fantastic because it gives people the permission to keep it as simple as saying, look, I just need to talk something through. I need to get
Mhm.
something out of my head. I don't really know what kind of help I need, but I just need to say some shit.
Mhm. And I should be honest, it took me a really long time to figure out that that was a plausible source for help for me. Like, I had to learn the hard way by like having conversations with my partner and my partner giving me solutions, and I get really defensive. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, oh, you're validating all of my fears, which is not true. Again, that's all a storyline, but I had to learn kind of the hard way where I'm like, oh, I'm actually not looking for any kind of solutions. When I'm sharing this, I just want to vent. I'm like, I just want you to listen and be like, hey, love you, like, great, you're doing great, like, I'm here, like, you're good, like, stuff like that. And saying that I'm okay. Like, I had to try a bunch of different things before I learned, oh, this is what works best for me. Like, and that's really scary too, because you have to put yourself out there to try different things that might trigger you if you ask for help and they help you in the wrong way. So being
Yeah.
open to like different types of help is already hard. So it's like this double layer of like asking is hard, receiving in a way that might not do it for you is also hard. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think another way I like to think about it too is that whenever we need help, it's some kind of, it feels like a blockage. Like it feels like we're trapped or we're stuck or something
Mhm.
is holding us down or whatever. But what and so just speaking it out, because it's all just energy, like emotions are just energy,
Mhm.
just blurting it out or journaling about it
Yeah.
like you do on a daily basis, you just happen to do
Yeah.
it publicly.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and that just moves the energy. So it's like, I
Mhm.
like to talk about it more as like this fluidity kind of thing.
Yep.
All you're trying to do is just achieve some fluidity, and
Yep.
then you can see what other help you need, what else needs to be done about it, if you need
Mhm.
another step, or if that was it. You just needed to speak it out and get it out, and you're done.
I love, yeah, it's like let it flow. And then also, I think a good first step for anyone that's like, oh, I don't know who to talk to. It's like therapy is the best way to start. And then you're not putting it on family or friends. You're not like you have this third party person you can be really honest and open with and say, hey, I don't know what I need help with. Can you help me? Can you help me think of how I can even be helped? Is like therapy was such a critical part of me being able to ask my friends and family and to build that like repertoire with them. So
Mhm.
therapy, let it flow, get it out. I love that whole analogy is perfect.
Good, thank you. And that's a great little plug
Yeah.
for therapy as well.
Yeah. Had to get it in.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
um okay, so a couple kind of like quote unquote last questions, because of course every question could turn into its own full conversation. But switching gears just slightly, because of the fact that you have moved around a ton, especially in this
Mm.
last year, your partner's work took you to Italy, and then you spend a bunch of time in Austria and other parts of Europe. Now you're back in North America.
Mhm.
Since you're a constant wanderer, you're an adventurer, you're about to do this trip in Patagonia. So, what is your concept, or I should say, what is your definition of home?
Mm. Whew.
And part B is just how has that changed over time?
That is a hard one. And for 2 years, I haven't had a traditional home. I haven't been in a place for more than a couple of months. So during the last year abroad in Europe, and then the year before that, kind of around the United States, didn't. I don't think I knew what my definition of home was. I think I was kind of searching for it, and I loved the idea of home being, um, a person, right? That sounds so like lovey-dovey, hopeless romantic. Like home is my partner. It's not. I love Taylor, my partner. Sorry, that was confusing, but I, uh, I actually realized like home is me. It's my body. It's who I am, and it's always changing, just like my environment. I also think that it's not just a partner, but it's a community. I have found that the places that feel the most like energetically right are the places where there are people who are interested in you, who love you, who will be there for you. I think that's been a
Mm,
really big part of the journey. The places that I haven't connected to people or have had like a really big language barrier, I haven't felt like home, and I felt very chaotic and very like just like energetically misaligned. And every time I get somewhere where there's someone who reaches out, or we go to coffee, or I go to a coffee shop and can speak English to someone, or like can speak in a local language enough for them to show empathy and kind of a little bit of love. Those are the places that feel home, like home to me.
mm,
Yeah, but, primarily it's within my own body in a lot of respect, where it's like, this body is coming with me for the rest of forever, and I you know, wherever I go, it's gonna be the same thing, right? They say, like, you're under the same moon no matter where you are, and it's kind of that same
yeah.
thing for your body where this body's coming with me, and it does. If I get actively out externally activated, take a second. Like, I know I'm gonna be okay. That's it. That's home. That
Mm.
okayness is home.
I love it. Good for you.
Oh,
That's such a
oh,
great, yeah, that's such a cool answer. And
oh,
it's,
thank you.
yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like it's a combo. I mean, it's always going to be like you in your
Mhm,
physical body and like wherever you're taking your body, that's home. But
Right.
I like that you also add the importance of the community, just kind of
Yeah.
connection in general. Like there's a
Connection.
specific form of connection that you find so grounding and comforting that it feels
Hmm.
like, the word belonging gets tossed around a lot,
Yes.
but it seems
Yeah.
like that's kind of what you're talking about, of like you belong to your body and that feels like
Yeah.
home. And then there's that connection where you feel like you can belong with those other people or the community.
Yes. And I
Mm.
and I truly did think it was a romantic partner for a while. I did think it was, oh, the mountains anywhere. I'm like, oh, I mean, I do love the mountains. Trust me, like again, another romanticized version of what home I thought home should be. But like after experimenting and learning, it's really those two factors, belonging and
Yeah.
self.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's great. So
Thanks.
along these lines, you're how do you feel about the term nomad? And do you
Oh,
identify as a nomad?
so I struggle with it. Because I think it's been glamorized in a lot of respects. I think digital nomad is like such a hot hashtag and like everyone's like, I want to be a digital nomad. I'm like, yes, being nomadic is beautiful. I think
Which by definition you are a digital nomad because you
I
have a
know, I
digital
hate it.
brand and you're all over the world.
I know.
Yeah.
I like really need to actually someone told me recently a beautiful way of rephrasing it. Of course I can't remember it in the heat of this moment, but
Sure.
I struggle with it because I think again it only it like has this really positive light without showing any of the like deep challenges that come with it. I think if there was more vulnerability around what actually like a digital nomad's life looks like, where it isn't just like beautiful coffee shops in Thailand or like, beautiful mountain photos, which I do have, but like I like to say that like I also like deeply struggle every time I go somewhere where they can't speak where people can't speak English. Like learning languages is really hard for my brain as much as I try. It's super challenging. And when you're moving around Europe, it's like, oh, I'm speaking Italian. No, next week I'm speaking German. The next week I'm speaking French. And my brain's all types of jumbled. But I think and I want to show up in that culture as respecting them and trying to make an effort so that I can try and be like a good global citizen. But I think that's something that's kind of skirted over. It's just like beautiful photos and like opportunity to travel anywhere. And I I, I don't know. I just struggle with digital nomad so much, and I want to like have more love for it. Since you're right. I'm literally doing exactly that. But yeah, it needs like a reckoning. It needs like a deglamorizing moment where also like people who don't do digital nomad, who if you have a beautiful home in New York and you have a community, that is just as beautiful. I think right now it's like this weird ranking of like people who can travel anywhere. That's the dream. And I'm like, I also think it's really dreamy to have a community, have a home, have a place that you can be and like flow. Like I just think it's a lot of pandemic kind of reaction where we've spent all of our time at home and everyone's like, I'm so done, I want to travel. And I do think there's like a balance where it's like you can have a home and still travel, and that's still beautiful. You don't have to do it all the time.
For
So that's my
sure.
rant on digital nomad. I am definitely a nomad. I am curious. I struggle to be settled for a long time. I know that I'm definitely looking for a home base, so that I can have a base camp, have sanity, have a place that is my own community, I'm belonging. But I will always kind of be curious to travel. I think that's just been a part that's been a late life and awakening of being like, oh, in my late 20s, early 30s, being like, okay, I do really enjoy travel. I like having the cultural challenges, but I do want to have like some form of stability for sure.
Hmm.
Sorry,
Nice.
that was a long ramble about digital
That's
nomads.
that's fine, and it was great.
Oh, oh
So
gosh.
yeah, no, and that's fine. I mean, there's a lot of pieces to that, and I think what you brought up is important. That, and honestly, this could and probably should be content for your posts too,
Mm,
about how non-glamorous being a digital nomad can be. And I think you already
yeah.
do. I think you already toe a really good line with that too, just in your honesty of like, hey, this is really hard. or like, hey,
Mhm.
today was really hard, even though I'm sitting here in Italy,
Yeah.
like typing this with a, with a beautiful view of the mountains. I'm still a human
Mhm.
being who's facing like a really hard professional challenge today, or whatever it is. Even
Yeah,
something
and
like that.
that's been tricky when I had a lot of angst, especially in Italy, because it was, all Italian, and I wasn't getting the nature that I deeply craved. But when I was sharing kind of on a like consistent basis that I was struggling, and I got a lot of pushback being like, well, you're in Italy, like it's beautiful, the food's good. And it's like, yes, yes, it
But
is beautiful, and the food is
you're not a food blogger
yeah,
though.
I'm not a food blogger. And it was just again, you're always going to kind of have that pushback, but it's hard to keep sharing when sometimes it's like people want to hear the emotions, but only like a little bit of it sometimes. So it's been interesting. I want to keep sharing. It feels good to me to keep sharing, but it's definitely been hard when, it's that glamorized, but you're in Italy. And I'm like, well, why don't you come to move to Italy for 3 months, see how you feel? Let's talk about it. Like, it's going to be
Yeah.
really hard. I'm like, it's going to be beautiful in so many ways, but it's going to challenge the core of your being 100%.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to the most important reason why you're doing any of all of this, is just to return to who you are,
Exactly. Yeah.
not
Strip it
to
all away.
not to talk about how good the food is in Italy. I mean, like you could do a post about that, but like,
Sure.
but that person who comments on that picture or whatever clearly doesn't know the purpose of your brand.
Right. And it's like, it's that wanting to simplify it almost like they see it as like, well, you're getting to live this dream life that so many people are getting to do. And like, a lot of times it's a reflection of their own kind of want or pull and like, well, why aren't you grateful for what you have? And it's like, well, that is, I am, but I'm also in the process of, like you said, unraveling, rediscovering, re-understanding, just being and letting myself feel the feelings, feel the emotions, feel the pull. And yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
That's beautiful. The way that you just ended that is like the perfect summary of like the journey that we all should be striving to experience, of just
And
feeling
it's
the
hard.
emotions, feeling the pull, feeling the energy, challenging
Huh.
ourselves, trying to return to our vulnerability. Yeah.
Right.
Trusting the
Which is
process.
a lot harder than just going and being a digital nomad and making it like that's it. Like that's you. It's like, well, you're more than that too. Yeah. So
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah. And I really like how you described, after the digital nomad portion of your answer, you got back to just the definition of nomad, which is the idea of
mhm,
being curious and just kind of going with the flow and moving somewhere else based on either need or desire. And
mhm,
it's funny because I considered myself nomadic in my early to mid 20s too, up until actually probably a few years ago.
mhm.
Just because I was comfortable, I would get bored easily, but more so I was comfortable with the idea after a year of like, yeah, let's go try a different state.
Yeah.
I was more curious than
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
and and then what's really cool is now that I'm in my 30s, I've noticed that as I've moved around, I'm comfortable moving. Like I'm still
Yeah.
comfortable the idea of like going and living somewhere else, but I like packing up my stuff a whole lot less than I used to.
Uh-huh.
There used to be
Yep.
this kind of like romantic charm of me doing it
Okay.
independently, but
Mhm.
now, regardless of the fact that I'm with somebody and now we're packing up more stuff than just one of our stuff, that charm is gone of like the actual packing up and moving. So it's cool to notice that I'm more comfortable staying in a place longer, and
Mhm.
I'm still curious about living in other places. So I'm still open to moving. That's why I've continued to move so
Mhm.
much in the last 5 years. But it's really just cool to see that natural evolution and not put pressure on myself to always be a nomad or have to be
Yeah.
a nomad. Like
Yeah.
you're in a
That
different phase of that than I am, and that's fine.
but I think I'm close behind you because the thought every time right before we're about to leave a place, I have like a full meltdown. I'm like, "Oh my god, what are we doing?" Because I don't want to pack. And like my partner has a
Yeah.
running joke where he's like, "Oh, you're feeling the packing anxiety." And he's like, "It's gonna take you 15 minutes." I'm like, "Oh, I don't know if it's gonna take me too long." Like, and I don't want to keep kind of running around as like as much as like unpacking and repacking all of my stuff is fun. It's like I'm no longer wanting to do that as much. I'm like more smaller bags for like shorter periods, and then I think that's been kind of a big part of feeling that shift. And there's a little bit of a struggle because I have been nomadic, there is this false narrative I'm telling myself where it's like, well, people want to see me be nomadic, so I should keep being nomadic. And it's like, well, is it for you or is it for someone else? And that's been an interesting conversation I've had to have with myself a lot, where it's like, will you be happy if you go to this other place? And are you doing it because you want to show someone that you're doing something or doing something cool? Or, how would this impact your mental health? I've had to ask myself that a lot lately, where, there's been some cool trips that Taylor and I have talked about. And it's like, it doesn't make sense. When we got back to North America, we were thinking of going to a race in Madeira. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. I've never been there. And I had to reel it in and be like, that is not what I need right now. Like, I want to be in North America, settling for a second, catching my breath, figuring out long-term plans. It's been tricky.
Yeah. But it takes so much awareness too of that. And the cool thing too is that because this is all a process of trusting yourself and the process, you never have to write off those trips if you don't want to.
No.
Luckily, you're with a partner, just like I'm with a partner who loves to travel, loves to see other places, and we love experiences like more than things. And so with my fiance Sarah, like we definitely have a running list of places that like maybe we probably can't go in the next year, but 3 of them we will be able to go to in 2022. So it's cool to like have the menu in mind of just like, and over time be like, I guess we don't need to worry about those places or those experiences or those things, and just kind of let it flow as life should.
Fluid changing humans. And you're like, you know what? We don't want to go to Portugal anymore. That's all right. We pivot our priorities. And yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I love it. And so to kind of tie it up, there's so many more things that would be great to talk about, but I love the way that you have probably unintentionally said things that we've talked about and pieced it all together and connected it to the daily life that you're already living, which is such a great example, not only for your audience, but just for anybody who hears this, about how to be yourself, trust the process, and learn how to be vulnerable and do what's meaningful.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Love that. So to finish it up, one question I love to ask every guest I have on, this is inspired by my godfather, who was, and he's retired, even though he's still doing like lots of life-changing work, but he was a pediatrician, and he did a lot of work with med school residents, and he would host events and things. And there was a guy who came and talked to the residents, and the residents were asking all these nitty-gritty med school and doctor questions out of their own kind of nervousness of just like, oh, how do I be a good doctor? But the guy who spoke said, stop thinking about all that. Just think about what is your definition of a good life and treat people from there.
Ooh,
right?
That's beautiful.
I know, it's pretty cool. And so, of course, assuming that all of these residents are becoming doctors with good intentions and they have like a healthy definition of a good life, then that automatically is going to create more empathy and a more human connection, because it's something that they connect to. And so because of the fact that on this show, a lot of times I talk about redefining success, redefining failure, redefining happiness, fulfillment, what I love to ask is, for each guest, what is your definition of a good life?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard to follow. That is such a good story. I think a good life is one that leads with love. I think it sounds really cliche and really boring, but it's like following that inner gut, that inner voice. It's listening to yourself and being really present. I think it goes back to that, like, who am I right now? And you show up as that person. Even if that's a person that, might be angry, you're showing up as a human that is full of emotion and full of complexities. And you're not afraid to show up as that, because we all have it. We all have the good and the bad and the ugly
Mhm.
and the beautiful. And a good life is not hiding yourself, and keeping love at the forefront, because if you can open your heart to others and lead by that example of love, then you will continue to be met with it as well. And it kind of just, it has a process of everyone setting each other free to be themselves. And that sounds like a great life. If everyone can just be themselves and be imperfectly perfect, that's it.
I could not agree more. I love that. Well
Oh,
said.
thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. Um,
Of course.
that's a perfect and very inspiring and clear way to end the episode. So before we go though, tell everybody where they can either find you, or what's the best way for them to find the link to your Patagonia trip if they're interested.
Sure. So I can be found on literally any social media app under my name, which is Liz Fieser. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, they're all the same. It's all very boring, very easy. But
I'll
in
put
order
all the
to find,
links also. I'll put every link in the show notes too. So go ahead.
perfect. Thank you. And then the trip link can be found in the bio of any of my social media. So all
Okay.
links right there. Easy to find.
Awesome. I love it. And yeah, everybody, just from personal experience from following her on Instagram and following her on TikTok, the variety of things that she's sharing, the variety of pictures, the variety of videos she's posting, it's all so impressive and inspiring. And especially her writing as well underneath the pretty pictures. It's so deep,
Oh,
it's so vulnerable, it's so real and so raw. So highly recommend giving it a follow. And if you know anybody who is interested in hiking Patagonia with
yeah.
Liz next year as her debut tour guiding trip, I'll make sure that all the links are very clear in the show notes for that.
Thank you. Oh, I'm very excited. I'm really glad that this was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed this.
Me
And I'm
too.
excited for our 60-year reunion. And I can tell you what success looks like.
Yes. Yeah. I find myself very lucky that every guest I have on, I want to have a follow-up interview with at some
That's
point in the
amazing.
future. So yeah, I'll just create like
It's a good
seasons and
sign.
it'll just be the same guests every season.
You're documenting everyone's growth. I love it. I think it's a
Yeah.
great idea.
Yeah. There you go. It's formulating. But
Yeah,
all that's to say, thank you so much, Liz, for taking the time. We're all busy these days and life is hectic. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
of course. So happy to be here.